Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Creative Thinkers. My name is Miguel Valenzuela, and again, we are still dealing with the whole COVID situation, so we are coming to you guys from our homes. Today, we have a really cool individual, Juan Ferret, who is a local philosopher. Really interesting because he is part of our community and he wants us to learn a lot of really cool things. So, Juan, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Miguel. It's a delight to be here. I was born in Barcelona, Spain, many years ago, and when I was 17, I thought it would be a good idea to go and do my last year of high school abroad. So I applied and I was sent, I mean, literally I didn't pick anywhere. I was sent to the United States in the northernmost part of Washington State.
Wow.
So I did my last year of high school at the Spokane Indian Reservation, Springdale High School, which was a phenomenal experience for me. And so that's how I came to the United States as a student and barely knowing English and developing into an experience that will basically change my life.
How was that when you come into another country where you're not really a native language speaker? Is it something that really pushes you into thinking outside the box? How do I figure this out? Was that something that you ran into?
Yes, and what's interesting is I thought I was pretty outside the box thinker when I was in Spain, and as a young man, I already learning about philosophy there. But when I came to the United States, it really opens your eyes as to how limited our worldview really is, unless you get to experience it, and not just experience it, let's say in a documentary, in a movie, but really experience it in an almost day-to-day basis. So it really served for me to really open up the idea of what it is to be a human being in a different place, where in a sense you don't belong. And I really wanted to be there, and they made me feel very welcome, and it was a really fantastic experience. But I had to learn how to think very differently, and of course, learning a language, it really forces you automatically to think very differently. So it was really eye-opening. I went back to Spain after that summer, and my father asked me, "What do you want to do?" I said, "Well, actually, I really enjoy the Northwest. It was really a fascinating place for me, so I wanted to return, and I had applied to different universities, and one of them in the Northwest accepted me, Gonzaga University, so I decided to go back. So I really enjoyed my experience up there, and but then I was going back and forth, usually in the summers, some holidays I would go back to Spain, visit my family, and spend time with friends and work on certain things. But that's when I really began to sort of solidify my time here, and eventually, obviously I just stayed, and now Paso is my home. But in between, I had to think very hard about this question: is where is home? That was not obvious, because in one sense, home is where you are, but another one is where you feel you are most. And there was this period for many years of transition of where home was, and home was in Spokane for many years, but also Spain, and then it was Eugene, Oregon, because after I went to Gonzaga, I still decided to stay in the Northwest, and went to University of Oregon then for graduate school. But so yeah, it was an interesting journey.
So you mentioned a little bit about being in Spain. Were there influences in Spain that kind of guided you to what you ultimately became as an individual, now that you are a professor and now that you are an individual who really thinks about these philosophical ideas and how to integrate them into our society? In Spain, were you thinking that?
For sure, there were great influences in my thinking, and I mean, from my family to the social, environment I was in, which in a way I kind of wanted to reject, because I grew up in a sort of privileged household. I mean, we were well off and surrounded by people that were well off. And to me, the biggest influence was that I was in the middle of a very desirable situation in terms of economics and social access, and I just didn't like it. And I couldn't articulate it. Now I probably can articulate it more, but it was, to me, it was the desire to flee, to leave, which many people ask me even today, why did you leave Barcelona? Well, partly Barcelona is great. There's great artists which influenced my thinking, from Gaudí to Dalí, to great philosophical thinking in our community in Barcelona. But ultimately I left because of the social, political, closer environment I grew up in. I felt that I needed to liberate myself from it. And that was the biggest influence, and not a total rejection, but I wanted to be, like you suggested, out of my own box that I grew up with. And coming here allowed me that, and it continued to allow me to do that further, because I wasn't done just for a few years. So I still go back home. It's now a place I go and visit. It still feels like home in many ways, and it is historically, but my home is here in El Paso, and it's very clear. I've been here for the last 20 years, so it's, somebody asks me where you're from, I say I'm from El Paso, but originally.
When you came to El Paso, how did you decide this is the place for me to be?
Well, after I did graduate school in Eugene, in Oregon, I wanted to find a place, possibly in the United States, where I could teach, but I didn't want to teach, frankly, at elite schools. I wanted to be at a place that was diverse, partly because, that was more exciting to me than, let's say, to go to a place in which I would be teaching. When I tried to escape from Spain, the privilege, I wanted to reach out to people who would understand how difficult it is to overcome not having privilege, and maybe also diverse in other ways, in culture, in ideas, language. So when I got offers, and I had few offers, the most interesting one was El Paso. So when I came to El Paso, I did it with the idea that this could be home already. Well, what's gonna happen in terms of career and things. But my goal was to come here and use this as an opportunity to see what I could do for the community. And it was clear what the community was going to do for me was continue to open up my thinking to new vistas, a way to understand difference, understand diversity at a fundamental level, which is one of the main questions that I had as a philosopher. And so it's been very rich. And this home for me, because I live here, but also is because intellectually has been one of the most phenomenal places for me to be. And a lot of people ask me, why you're not in Barcelona? It's such a rich cultural. I think I'm so happy to be here. This allows me to expand my thinking in ways that, frankly, I couldn't do in Barcelona. Maybe others could go to Barcelona and do that, but for me, this is the place to be and develop my thinking programming that I do.
And do you think that part of that is cultural? We live on the border, so we actually do have a real big melting pot of all different types of cultures, but specifically Mexican culture and kind of Mexican-American culture and American culture. Was that something that, do you think, helps you in your philosophical ideas?
Well, absolutely. And I already knew before I come to El Paso that one of my areas of investigation and the foundations of science that I was doing in my dissertation all ultimately had to do with the role of transgression of boundaries, whether it's understanding an electron and how it transgresses boundaries to form itself into the quantity that we can measure, or as human beings that we transgress boundaries. As I was explaining, my transgressing of the boundaries of being a Spaniard and Catalan to coming to the United States, that transgression of boundaries, it can be just something that happens, or for me was a point of reflection, which led to my professional career in many ways. And so it has helped me fundamentally, even to the point, and I'll just mention this briefly because maybe I'm anticipating much, but as part of the work we do, one of the things that we develop is a logic system that is based fundamentally on this idea of boundaries and transgression of boundaries, not just social, political, economic, but really at a fundamental, logical, cognitive level that then, if we understand, we can utilize to gain access to incredible inquiry. And we use it, we've developed it, for the last 4 or 5 years, we've used it. So I would say being at the border, at a place of boundaries, has been phenomenally important to me personally, but also the work we do and what we've created.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned boundaries because you're focusing on boundaries, then you live by a boundary. Was that something that you lived close to a border in Spain, Barcelona in the southern part of Spain, so not too close to a border of France?
It's actually in the northeast. It's not too far from France,
okay.
But distance sense, here we would say Barcelona is almost at the border. But the truth is, but for us in Spain, Barcelona was not at the border. And frankly, the idea of border towns when I grew up was a place that doesn't make sense. How can you feel Catalan if you almost part French or
right?
Part of what I had to liberate myself from this thinking that you have to belong fully, because the idea of borders is very uncomfortable. I suspect it's still very uncomfortable for a lot of people if they share my way of thinking from the past. That's why I gravitated to think about borders very differently. But no, I mean, in Spain, it was actually the opposite. I was, I grew up in a good Catholic framework of things have to be from perfect bounds, and the truth is that maybe the reaction to that is what led me to my interest in borders.
So borders, now we're sitting here in the borderland, that's what we call it. And once in the border, you're actually helping people out. Can you explain and tell us a little bit about exactly what you do in what you're trying to do for the general public? Because there's a very specific group of people that you try to help, correct?
Yes, correct. So let me tell you that when I did my work for graduate school, for my doctorate in philosophy, my focus was on the foundations of physics, primarily the foundations of quantum mechanics. But on that, my interest was what happens at the boundaries of systems. So, and that was a broad question that I had. I was just focusing in on that issue in science. But when I came here, I was as a professor at UTEP at first in the philosophy department. I was able to explore and teach a lot of classes and do a lot of research on different areas, including indigenous thought of the Maya to the role of aesthetic and art into our ways of thinking. So I was able to continue learning when I was a teacher here. And then in 2010, I, along with some others, we created sort of a place where we can think about how to take some of those concerns and philosophical ideas and maybe put them to work for our community. And one of the places that eventually developed, always with philosophy at the forefront, and then shortly after, the idea that art and philosophy should work together in our programming was established. So we created a series of possible pathways. And one of them that we chose as one that we wanted to pursue was to give higher learning in philosophy and the arts to people that might not have access to it, to maybe people that we don't deem as being worthy of having access to higher learning. So we kind of really reversed, I mean, not only thought about the box, we're going to flip the box on its head and say, well, we're going to begin to explore the possibility of offering a course type class based on art and philosophy and other things, obviously, to people who maybe are just coming out of prison, to maybe as a way to help them come back and join us in our community.
Right.
And we had done some research. We realized that's a big gap. It's a big problem in the United States. A lot of people that go to prison, about 75%, they end up going back to prison instead of rejoining our communities. So there's a huge glaring problem. And even though there were some solutions being proposed, there was still a lot of things that we could do. So we ended up with a proposal, and I was fortunate to be able to have some colleagues and some people that were receptive to the idea. And in 2013, we started working with the federal courts, first on a completely volunteer basis, to create a pilot program called Shadows to Light, which we offered people that had been in federal prison and were now on probation, federal probation, the opportunity to learn, from the arts, from philosophy, and really learn together how to be human, how to minimize our errors, because we all make errors as we do in our everyday, and therefore maybe give all of us really ultimately a chance to be better. And of course, the premise with us and that course was maybe we can help minimize recidivism. And we've been doing that, like I said, for about 7 years. And then the federal government started liking what we do. They started offering us a contract. And since then, we've had quite a lot of success in helping. I keep saying all of us because it's really helped me too, but help everybody that is in that class, achieve a different way to not only engage in everyday experience, but to learn how to learn at a deep level. We do a lot of art in the class. We do a lot of philosophical thinking in the class. And what we found is people who maybe came up out of school with not a lot of enthusiasm for learning, school learning, that maybe with some educational setbacks, maybe they only had a 4th, 5th grade reading level. We found that they were able to get engaged at a deep level quickly once they recognize that what we're offering was an opportunity for them to achieve their potential. I know we use that all the time, but I think we always fall short. But so we've been really enjoying doing this work of helping people come back to our communities, but doing it with higher learning, doing it with almost a college level type inquiry process or class, and it's been phenomenal.
I think it's incredible that you're sitting there helping the community and helping people who may have never had the opportunity to get and have, an opportunity to do different things, like maybe go back to school, or just as simple as integrating them back into society. And do you think that there is a definite disconnect there as far as what these people have been through and then what they continue to do when they go back, as opposed to how you guys kind of get in between there and then bring them to a completely different place? Is there a disconnect there that you then make a connection to, or is it just something that is lacking?
Well, I think it's both. There is a disconnect and there's some things that are lacking. And it's a complex question because the disconnects are not just one or two, there are many. For instance, one of the disconnects is that we as a society, when somebody is deemed a criminal, a felon, and they have served time in federal prison, they're always a felon and they're always a criminal. So that's a disconnect because supposedly they're served their time, under the law, they're, free citizens, and, in the state of Texas, they're supposed to be able to vote and do all these kinds of things. But it's not trivial. There's a disconnect because in one way we treat them differently than we're supposed to. So that's one. Another one is one that they do to themselves. They've been to prison. They feel like they are maybe not going to be successful, that they have all the attributes of what we call, and I hate using the term, but they're losers, and maybe their family deemed them like that. So the disconnect is like, wait a second, that these things happen, that you committed maybe a grave error or an error or a series of errors or some terrible habits. That doesn't mean that that's who you are. That means you have the power to change things. You have the power to recommit those errors or think in a different way, think out of the box. And so that's another one. And of course, from cognitive science, we know that we have a lot of cognitive errors that we commit in general as human beings. Well, part of the disconnect is that, but it's also a lack of belief that people can, with the proper help from higher learning, that they can help themselves transform, which is different than instructing somebody, which we don't do, telling them, no, you need to change in this way, or believe in these 4 things, or if you do these 4 things, then you'll be transforming our eyes. We don't do that. We give them the full power to figure out how they want to transform, knowing that the program that we offer through the federal government has certain metrics, for them to graduate and be successful. Like if they commit another crime, well, our hands are kind of tied. So we work very hard to try to persuade them that that's not a good idea, right? But ultimately the goal is to treat them as very capable, which they are, and give them the tools and habitual practices to lead the kind of life that they want to choose, which hopefully aligns with one that empowers them to be full citizens that are positively minded, and not only they don't commit crimes, but they actually overcome a lot of the deficiencies that might have led them to crime in the first place. So yeah, I could go on, but that's
yes, I can imagine that you can. But I have two very important questions. One, what in your opinion is the connection between the creative process and what you're teaching the individuals in that program, and how connected is art to that program? Fundamentally, is it like a basic element of what one needs to kind of get the gears rolling in order for them to think differently?
I think it is fundamental, and not art as something that you do once in a while, or you do an activity and then, let's say, you color or you do a response aesthetically to that. We believe that art and philosophy together, almost like the creative exercise, need to be at the forefront of really any educational experience. Because besides this project, we have another one. It's called Art Stream, and we train teachers and we go into classrooms where art, and in the words of one of my colleagues, Micah Cohen-Jones, we use the concept of art as a thinking like an artist process, rather than art as something that you good with, one of the art forms, but rather we all can think like artists, which is kind of like thinking like scientists, thinks creatively out of the box. So we infuse every single lesson that we do, we infuse it with that attitude, which sometimes does lead to, for instance, if we're reading a text in literature, if let's say we're reading Borges and we're wondering about the role of possible paths that we can take as human beings, and the maze of options and choices that we have, well, maybe we will have a response based on a poem, based on one of those reactions that we may have, and it's all going to be different. And afterwards, this poem will get discussed, and maybe ideally, eventually, we would love to, for instance, publish those the poetry and those art responses from our participants. But it begins with opening up. So before we can do the poem, it needs to begin with opening up and exposing our participants, our students, to them thinking creatively outside of the box, that they can become good with the power of the word. Or we also do some painting and sketching with the limited means we have and time we have, but just allowing them to explore, because if you don't, you'll just never know how good of a word artist you can be, right? Or how good can you be with representing what's in your mind using a mix media forms. Sometimes we include music and visits to virtual museums now, because we're virtual, together as part of that exploration. So it's fundamental. We don't treat it as a nice thing to add. No, I mean, we don't make any sense unless we treat sort of the creative artistic experience, as Dewey would say, art as experience, as something that is already shared, but that we can learn how to expand to become, even better in our lives. So.
Yeah, I remember one of the things that I first read when I was very, very young, the whole aspect of creativity, that creative people begin with just a tiny little drop of something. For example, if I'm walking down a pathway, I can look at a flower, and from that flower will grow a painting. From that flower will grow a poem. From that flower can grow a whole story or a novel. And I think that that's what you're trying to do with these individuals. So in the future, what is happening? What do you have coming up for the city of El Paso as far as philosophy and creativity? Anything new?
Well, yes, there's very exciting things. Some of them that we will announce publicly in a little bit, but we are going to be able to expand our programs first and foremost. We've been doing that, but we're going to do it carefully to ensure quality. But one of the things we hope to accomplish is to develop further types of programs that reaches all kinds of people, not just people who have been, let's say, in federal prison, but others who want to achieve similar kind of results, but they've had different kinds of difficulties. And we hope to achieve that with partners, in the way we have partners in the judicial system and with a local foundation, the El Paso Community Foundation. We have great partners. We hope to achieve, great things in terms of higher learning with, for instance, El Paso Community College and the University of Texas at El Paso and others, in that we can create systems that work together to enhance what we offer. Because one of the things I believe we can offer that's really powerful is this access to what higher learning is. A lot of people say, no, I didn't like school, therefore college is not for me. But wait a second.
I was there.
A lot of people say that. And one of the things that we've seen in our result in our program is a lot of people said, no, school, never. They're already signed up while they're in our program for EPCC, not just vocational school, which is already great. And some of them do go into vocational school. And we have great partners with that at EPCC already with Dr. Valerio and her programs. But the truth is that we're also exposing them to more liberal arts, humanities type curriculum through and through. So some of them now saying, I want to go and get a degree in business or get a degree in criminology or criminal justice. So it's a way, I think what we do is a way to really open up the vistas. And once they open up the vistas, to learn the skills and habits, so they will continue and stay true to their pathways. Because as you know, a lot of people begin college and they don't finish college. And one of the things that I think that we would like to work on is both who gets to venture into the hallways of higher education, but how well will they stay? And part of what we would love to work with our partners and future partners is developing really robust programs for really anybody in our community that wants to. But that's our long-term goal. Maybe in a few years from now, you will see versions of Shadows to Light in community centers, and we're working on that, or maybe with joint partners at EPCC and UTEP. But the goal for us as well, and this is kind of a very lofty goal, because as I mentioned, we've developed a logic system based on boundaries, based on what our needs of our students are, to be able to think at the highest level and quickly. So it had to be a simple to teach, but powerful logic system. What we've learned from using our experience from our students using that logical tool is that people can think in complex ways, very powerfully. The problem is that we don't sometimes notice the errors in that complexity. They escape us. And if we learn how to fix those errors, that's when true higher learning happens. And I think that if we're able to offer to our community this logical, artistic, philosophical pathway, then we are ensuring very rich culture, very rich communities done from the ground up, from everybody's perspective, everybody's interest, everybody art form, so to speak, creativity, but we're also able to do it together. And my vision, maybe when I finish with this set of projects, is that we can say that we've helped create artistic, philosophic communities, because I believe, I can argue too, that philosophy is best done from the ground up, not just a few of us working to do philosophy, but all of us engage in the act of philosophical and artistic inquiry. So,
and I think it's beautiful that you've been able to do all of these things. I want to thank you very much for enlightening us with all of these beautiful ideas that you have as far as creativity and philosophy. So I hope you enjoyed yourself.
I did. Thank you so much. Thank you, Miguel, and thank you to Kim Diaz, my great partner in Shadows to Light. Without her, I wouldn't be here, also because, you know, she recommended to you that I was here. So I thank you both, and to your whole team. I believe that what you're doing is really a tremendous program. Please keep at it. Hear those voices in our community of creativity is fantastic. So thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you very much. So I wanted to thank everybody for joining us again for Creative Thinkers. Once again, my name is Miguel Valenzuela, and we are coming to you from our homes. So everybody stay safe. Thank you.